Psychologists of Reddit, what's one thing a patient has told you that caught you off guard, or vice versa? Patient's perspective? My therapist once abruptly ended our session after telling me I needed to go to the ER. I had been in a car accident the day before and had an undiagnosed concussion that was pretty bad. I was so out of it I didn't even realize I was out of it. He later told me I was talking about inappropriate topics. I was so embarrassed I didn't ask what I specifically talked about. I didn't want to know at that point, and wasn't making much sense. I'm just glad he recognized I was off that day and helped me get to the hospital. Man, concussions are hell. I've had a few. I've got one sister-in-law who hasn't spoken to me since I was chatting with her via Skype chat while recouping in the hospital. I don't even remember what the frick I said. When I was in 1st or 2nd grade, the school counselor fell asleep when I was describing a bullying situation that I was in. I was so young that I didn't know how to respond, so I just sat there in his office until he woke up. I had a therapist tell me when I was a teenager that she didn't know what else to do to help me, because it seemed like I already understood everything pretty well. This was after my overbearing and crazy helicopter mum dragged me in for being depressed. Then she switched to therapying my mum, and my mum quickly was in tears because she has the emotional strength of a child and wanted it to be about me when it was actually all about her. I knew exactly why I was depressed. I was stuck by myself in the middle of nowhere with her crazy ass. No personal space, no ability to get away, not being able to say no, her getting jealous of my friends when I spent time with them. It would make anyone depressed. She didn't even let me sit with the therapist by myself. I paid and sat through an entire session of therapy during which my therapist ranted as to how great of a career he could have had as a stand-up comedian and how much he regrets his current profession. I kinda agreed with him near the end. Except, it wasn't funny. Told mine I had seen him grabbing a drink at the same place I used to go get drunk before Ovid. He stared at me like I had discovered something NASA was hiding. We had a laugh and he confessed it. Context: I had huge drinking problems and he told me he didn't like to drink at all. That's actually pretty funny. It is. After that things got way easier for me. And he inspired me to become a shrink myself after this crazy time's end. I did most of my training in a pediatric hospital. One of my patients, young adult, with relapsing leukemia, cancer since young childhood, wanted to go to an outdoor festival with their significant other. The oncologists were adamant that due to the patient's low white blood count and current course of treatment, they shouldn't let them go. Basically, if that person caught an infection it would kill them. The patient was pissed, understandably so, and said something like, "I've had this disease since I was a child. I know I'm going to die soon. I'm going to the concert whether you like it or not, and if I die, then at least I'll do it on my own terms." It's always quite moving when a young person expresses their own mortality and confronts it head on. I had such admiration for that person. I was in my 2nd ever session, which coincidentally was right after my nan's funeral. I was talking about some stuff that had happened with my sister, who I had already said was probably my biggest issue, and he asked, "Why is this person in your life? Why do you want to continue a relationship that hurts you so much? Do you actually want this relationship?" I was floored. It had never occurred to me that my sister didn't get a place in my life by default, because family. I can't tell you how much this improved my life. Left both my mother and her reincarnate, my sister, behind years ago. Can't express how much better my life is without them in it. Rotten is rotten. I'm a clinical psychologist working on the back end of my postdoc. I work predominantly with acute adolescent presentations such as chronic self-injury or axial trauma. I'm so used to the young people I help hating themselves. It hurts a lot inside, but I firmly believe in catharsis through positive regard and validation. So as we do our therapy, I often sprinkle in comments here and there about some of the things about them that I admire, respect, or appreciate. Things like their perseverance, their kindness, or their passion for an interest of theirs. I'm always so caught off guard when they agree with me or say something nice about themselves that it's really the only time I find myself slightly tearful in session. I'm always so damn proud of them and it hurts to hear the depths of their self-hatred. Those little moments of growth make me feel like it's the first warm day after winter. During my first and only session with a particularly memorable child psychologist, he referred to me as a miserable bitch. It was true, but he didn't have to call me out like that. I was in a psych hospital as a teenager. While all the patients went to their rooms to do homework or whatever, the mental health techs, nurses would do their shift change. They'd have a meeting to update the night shift on how the patients were doing and anything that happened earlier in the day. My room was right next to the kitchen, which was where the meetings happened. One day, my door was slightly open and I decided to listen in on the meeting. The first thing I hear is the main tech saying, "Mrvektorabd, Psy, he's a mess." I never held it against him, because I knew it was true and he was a really good guy, but it was a little shocking hearing it said so bluntly. It's definitely funny in hindsight. I was in the ED after a suicide attempt and heard the nurses' shift change meeting too. They said that girl in bed 6 did it to herself. Don't waste your time there. I mean, it was true, but frick me, nobody ODs and carved up their arms, because it's a boring afternoon. Suicide attempts generally mean you're not very well mentally. I had one tell me I needed to learn to bite the bullet, which turned out to be good advice, even if it was blunt. Patient here. In response to me telling my therapist that I was prescribed Wellbutrin for my depression, anxiety, my therapist stated that it was a medication that a lot of adults with ADD see a positive effect with. It threw me off for a second and I was like, "That's cool, why do you say that?" Therapist. "Because you have ADD?" Me. "What? I do?" Therapist. "Yes. You present very typical ADD for adults." Me. Therapist. "I thought you knew already." Me. "Nope. But that explained so much. I also got a second opinion just in case and it turns out I absolutely am ADD. Thanks doc. LOL. When I was in high school I was hospitalized for being suicidal. My doctor there told me some really brilliant advice that totally cleared things up for me, basically just fixing me on the spot. You just have to be a normal boy. LOL. And to think that he gets paid for that it. Context. I work a lot from an existential perspective. At this time I was working at a jail and talking to a guy who hitches rides on trains. We were talking about what he would have to do to change his life, to not just get high and ride trains. He looked me square in the eyes and told me he's freer than anyone else he comes across. He isn't indebted to a 40+ hour work week, bills, or debts. He just hangs out with friends and travels state to state. He articulated how he knows he'll die young from missing a jump, but that ultimately he'll have lived and died as he wanted to. It was a conversation that really forced me to be cognizant of human freedom and choice. He wasn't disordered. He had chosen his own path and conclusion. The only thing he was doing wrong was breaking the status quo, the law. Frankly, who am I to judge or decide how to live a life? From then on, I was more careful to never tell a patient how to live or what to do. I'm only here to help someone think through their life and pick their desired direction. I have come to use a lot of sophist techniques to get patients to their own eureka moments. I'm really messed up, been hospitalized a lot. I go through moments of such intense delusions that I'm no longer myself. I was admitted once, after trying to get my veins out of my arm, thinking they were wires. The doctor that was assigned to me wasn't really expecting me to be so paranoid. While in the observation room, he was trying to talk to me and I blurted, "What's it like being a robot, Mr. Robot Man?" I said, "Man, kind of like Mana," and he started laughing. He wasn't expecting it. I wasn't either. I laughed with him. He was such a nice East Indian man, and hearing anyone with the same accent makes me feel lighter somehow. That's actually really wholesome. But holy it, trying to rip your veins out of your arm has to be the most intense thing I've ever heard. Hope you're doing better. It's not as bad as it sounds. I wasn't able to do any serious damage. My delusions made me think I was in fact pulling things out, but I didn't get far into my own skin. I have scarring from it, but didn't reach any real veins. Luckily I wasn't lucid enough to go for real ones. I haven't had an episode like that one in a while. Most of the time it's outside objects and people I react to, like unplugging all electronics and making my sister answer a series of questions before I let her into the house. Not a psychologist, but I tried to see a therapist for some light to moderate incest-based trauma and chose the wrongest shrink. I didn't exactly do my research. I picked the closest therapist to my office that my insurance covered. It was billed as generic family therapy. Perfect, I thought, and booked an appointment for immediately after work. When I walked up to the front door, I noticed that it said Christian marriage and family therapy. I was immediately uncomfortable, but I was trying to be more open-minded towards those with a religious bent, and figured that as long as they could do their job, their religion was no concern of mine. I explained to the gent manning the desk that I wanted to talk about some mildly disturbing experiences, and I wasn't religious, or even aware that I had booked an appointment at a religious clinic. He was very kind and explained that he helped all sorts of people, and had heard it all. Then he led me to the therapy office, which consisted of a very large chair, a tiny rickety footstool, and wall-to-wall racks of tapes. I told him about a traumatic experience that had happened days previously, and his reaction shocked me. My therapist cried. He at me through watery eyes and said I don't know what to say. Tried to convince me that I wanted to have kids someday and that only him resolving my trauma would help me be the best mother I could be. I still don't want kids, so that was confusing. Expressed a relentless interest in trying past life regression or hypnotherapy. I point blank asked him, wasn't that proven to be ineffective in the 70s? And he assured me that he had been a part of a lot experiments and tests in the 70s, and this was the real deal. The last thing he said to me, after I told him I didn't want to have another appointment, was to rub his hands together and say wouldn't it be great to get into that head of yours, like a steel trap. To date, this was one of the most surreal things that has ever happened to me.